the matchup. Accelerate on the outside. City of Light toward the rail. Castellano and City of Light have the lead, and they cut the corner and open up. City of Light puts away Accelerate with an eighth of a mile to go. At the inside and seeking the soul, then Bravazzo. But City of Light keeps going, and City of Light will win it. It's City of Light for Javier Castellano, and a romp in the rain. He won by 5.
Welcome to the Racing Rundown podcast, episode number 1. You can listen to us on iTunes and Spotify. Watch us over on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Racing Rundown and on Twitter at Rundown Racing. Let's get into it. We got Pegasus World Cup recaps, 2019 horse racing season predictions / previews, and a recap of the first couple Kentucky Derby prep races of 2019. That would be the Withers, the Robert B. Lewis, and the Holy Bull down at Gulfstream. So let's kick off the first episode of the Racing Rundown podcast with Pegasus World Cup recap. I'm a week late with this, but it's okay. January 26th, the richest single day in American sports, $16 million up for grabs in the Pegasus World Cup Turf and Pegasus World Cup Dirt, respectively. $7 million in the Turf race, $9 million in the Dirt race. Turf race won by Bricks and Mortars, trained by Chad Brown. Dirt race won by City of Light, winner of the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, trained by Michael McCarthy, ridden by Javier Castellano. The big story coming into the Pegasus World Cup, the dirt race, was Accelerate and how he was going to fare against City of Light in their rubber match. City of Light had won against Accelerate, and Accelerate had won against City of Light. They'd raced each other twice. This would be the rubber match and the last race of each horse's career before they were retired to stud. And City of Light looked a lot better than Accelerate did. Accelerate didn't benefit from the wet track at all. City of Light benefited significantly from the wet track. But this race isn't a case of just one horse won because the track was wet and one horse didn't run well because the track was wet. City of Light probably runs a very similar race to what he ran on the wet track if there was a fast track. But the difference is at Gulfstream on the 26th, speed was carrying very nicely. And the speed was holding too. And that played exactly into how City of Light was going to run the race. And because of that, Accelerate had to sit closer to the pace than trainer John Sadler and jockey Joel Rosario were probably comfortable doing. They probably didn't want him to be as close to the pace as he was, but they had to do so because they couldn't let City of Light get away and open up an insurmountable lead. Of course, they did that, and by the time they got to the stretch, the race was over. City of Light opened up a 5-length lead, and he won the race by that margin. Now, two things that this race told us is Accelerate's retirement came at a very good time. There was a hint, and you could start to see in the last two races that he ran in 2018, that Accelerate had peaked. Accelerate in the Awesome Again struggled to put away a long shot isotherm and West Coast, who wasn't what we thought West Coast was going to be. And then in the Breeders' Cup Classic, Accelerate didn't get up to the lead and didn't win with the authority that he had won in other races. The Awesome Again and the Breeders' Cup Classic were very similar to each other. Accelerate kind of dragged home, it looked like, even though he did win the race, and he didn't win it with any significant issues. you
They're
could
off
tell
to the
that
withers. A stumble at the
Accelerate
start by
was kind
Tax,
of
but
tailing
Tax
off
will
and
be
had
sent to
already
the lead
peaked.
with Admire right up
And the
alongside
exact
our Brain
opposite
Trust.
is
To their
true for
outside, and
City
not
of
that
Light.
Brady joins them
City of
very
Light,
deep
I think,
into that turn. Now a
was
very
just
wide trip
beginning
there
to
for
come
not
into
that
his
Brady as they
own.
make their way into
And
that
I
turn.
think would have been an
And then
amazing
toward the inside
5-year-old.
comes
And
Moretti,
it's
who's racing about
disappointing
3
that
lengths off
the
the lead. Lucky
economics of
Lee is
horse
next, then Sir
racing,
Winston
as they
at
so
the back of the
often
pack.
do,
So they sorted
force
themselves
great
out,
horses
and not
like
that
City
Brady's
of
going to
Light
make the
to
front
step
as they
out
head
too
to the back
soon.
stretch.
But
Opening
it
quarter
is what
mile
it
at
is. At least we got to
23.56
see them
seconds. The
run
lead is a
one
length.
more
Our Brain
time
Trust on the
before
outside.
they
Second,
did
Texas
get
third at
turned
the rail.
out.
Admire fourth between
Now,
those
some of the
two.
big things that
Moretti
I think
follows
we
in
can be
fifth
looking
and
forward
races 4
to
lengths from the
in
front. Three
the
clear of Lucky
2019
Lee.
season
The
is
trailer Sir Winston
some
is
of the
10
late
lengths behind.
bloomers from
They
the
continue
3-year-old
up the
class
backstretch in the
last year,
withers with Not That
specifically
Brady on
MiKinzie.
top through a half
MiKinzie was
mile
very
in
good in
47.39
the
seconds.
Malibu,
3/4 of a length ahead of our Brain
and
Trust.
people are
Tax is
starting to
third. Moretti's
say,
moving now. Moretti
2019 is
fourth
going
on
to
the
be the year of
outside and only
MiKinzie.
2.5 lengths behind with a
Now,
half
I
mile to
want to see
go.
more from
Admire's
MiKinzie
coming
than
under a
just
ride,
one win,
and then it's Lucky
because I've
Lee.
seen this
And
from
the trailer
MiKinzie
is Sir
before.
Winston as
I've
they make
seen
their
him
way
win a
around the
race
far
and then
turn. Not
throw in a
That Brady.
clunker,
On
and
top
then win
by
another
a full
race and
length
then a
now
clunker.
with 3
So
furlongs to
if we
go.
can get
Our Brain
MiKinzie,
Trust is running along
if
in
we can
second.
have him
Texas
winning
third.
multiple races,
Moretti is
like he's
fourth and
running in
now
the
trying
San
to keep up,
Pasqual
losing a
this
bit of
weekend.
ground. A 3
So
wide
if
move there
he
for Lucky
wins,
Lee. Admire is next.
then I'll
Three
start to
quarters in
really pay attention to
111.44.
MiKinzie.
And they're into the
Another
stretch, and it
horse
is
from the
Not That
3-year-old
Brady up
class
the
that
turn in front.
I think
Our
has
Brain
a little
Trust
bit
bearing
less of
down
promise
Texas
of
in tight toward
MiKinzie,
the
but I
inside.
still think is
Trying to
going
squeeze
to
on through
make
here.
a little
Coming to
bit
the
of
final
noise in
16th.
2019
Our Brain
is
Trust, Not That
Bravazo.
Brady, and Tex on the
Bravazo was the
inside. The three of them
bridesmaid
across the
horse of
track.
2018.
Tex on the inside.
He was
Our Brain
always
Trust, Not That
close,
Brady fights on
but
between those
rarely
two.
got
These
up
three
there to
coming down
win.
to the
I
line in
think
the
he only
winners,
had one win
and
in
Tex
2018,
does
but
it.
he was second and
Tex
third
by
a
a
number
head
of
on the
times.
wire.
I
Not
think
That Brady was second. Our
Bravazo's
Brain Trust was third,
2019
and Sir
is going to
Winston
be a
was
lot
fourth.
like Accelerate's 2017, where he's going to be in a lot of races. He might steal a stakes race, but he ultimately isn't going to be the leader of the older horses in 2018. Shifting gears over to the female horses, we got Monomoy Girl fresh off an Eclipse Award. I think Monomoy Girl is ready for a big 2019. But I am cautiously optimistic with Monomoy Girl because I've seen great 3-year-old fillies have seasons like Monomoy Girl and even better than Monomoy Girl, and then come back for their 4-year-old season and just not be as sharp as they were at 3. So we'll see how it turns out with Monomoy Girl. I'm hoping that she is going to be kind of like a beholder and have another very good 4-year-old season, but she could also turn into a horse like Untappable. Untappable had a very good 2014 season, her 3-year-old season, and then she just never really found that form again. So hopefully we get with Monomoy Girl what we got with Beholder. And of course we can't talk about the 2019 horse racing season without the 3-year-olds, both the fillies and the colts. The two big names in the 3-year-old male division are game winner, very deserving winner of the Eclipse Award for Champion 2-year-old, and Improbable, both of them from the camp of Bob Baffert. And then we also have the 3-year-old filly Jaywalk, trained by John Sheriffs. I think all three of them are very intriguing coming into 2019. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to get from Game Winner and Improbable. I still want to see them run in May, but judging from the success that champion 2-year-olds and winners of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile have had in the recent years, as opposed to if you go back through history and look at the winners of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and how they've done in their 3-year-old season, there isn't a lot of success. That looks like it's starting to change with horses like what Nyquist and Classic Empire and Good Magic have shown you how they've been able to win races as 3-year-olds. And then Jaywalk looks really good too. So I'm looking forward to see what we're going to get from those three. And then also some other horses of note coming back for their 7-year-old seasons. We got Breeders' Cup Sprint winner and Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint winners, Roy H. and Stormy Liberal, respectively. Both 2-time Breeders' Cup Sprint and Turf Sprint winners, respectively. They're coming back for their 7-year-old seasons. I think we're going to see more of the same from them. And then also, a big story last year, the British filly Enable, first horse to win the Arc and the Breeders' Cup Turf in the same year. I think it's going to be a very big year for Enable. Maybe even a Breeders' Cup Turf repeat. I'm not sure entirely what we're going to get from Enable, but I'm hoping that it's more of the same. And maybe she will win 3 consecutive Arcs and repeat as a winner of the Breeders' Cup Turf. So that's basically what we got coming up in 2019. There's always the under-the-radar horses, like I mentioned Bravazzo. Gunnevera could come out of nowhere, even though I really don't think so. Gunnevera kind of reminds me a lot of Jameis Winston, Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback. I've heard for so many years, he's going to be great someday. And, Gunnevera, they said that before the Kentucky Derby. Gunnevera is a very, very big threat to win the Kentucky Derby. He didn't win that. I heard throughout his 4-year-old season, this is the year for Gunnevera. And I'm hearing that now, this is the year for Gunnevera. I'll believe it when I see it, but until I see it, I don't want to hear a lot about Gunnevera. There are far better horses that have shown me a lot more than he has. So this weekend, we had 3 Kentucky Derby prep races. In addition to that, we also had a very interesting race for older horses. We had the Holy Bull, which was won by a 25-to-1 shot called Harvey Wallbanger. We had the Withers at Aqueduct, which was won by Tax. And we had, out in California, we had the Robert B. Lewis, which was won by Mucho Gusto. All 3 of those races, 10 points for the winner of the race toward the Kentucky Derby. Let me group Tax and Harvey Wallbanger into the same analysis, if you will. Harvey Wallbanger was a 25-to-1 shot. Big price for him in the Holy Bull. And Tax was a 2-to-1 second or third choice. So Harvey Wallbanger kind of a surprise, Tax not really. But it's early February. Let's not get too worked up on these horses that have just won a February stakes race. Now, I don't like February stakes winners, but that's not to say that February stakes winners don't win the Kentucky Derby. I have no respect for January winners at all. There has never been a January winner to win the Kentucky Derby. I do not think any of the horses that won races in January are going to do anything when it comes time for the Kentucky Derby. But February races, I will pay a little bit more attention to because winners of those races have gone on to win the Kentucky Derby. But I just need to see more. So I want to see what Harvey Wallbanger and Tax do against other competition. And then let's go to Mucho Gusto. We know his game. And Mucho Gusto has been chasing Improbable, Bob Baffert's other superstar horse. Him and Improbable and Game Winner are going to be the 2 favorites for the Kentucky Derby. They are at this point, and I think they will hold on to that status through the rest of the spring. But Mucho Gusto has been chasing Improbable. And as I said with Tax and Harvey Wallbanger, their games I don't know about, but we know what kind of horse Mucho Gusto is. He's a horse that can win against competitions like the one that he ran against in the Robert B. Lewis. But I don't know what he's going to do against horses like Improbable and Game Winner. We still don't know of the 4 Baffert horses where they're going to go. Improbable probably is going to go to Oaklawn. Game Winner, well, we know where Game Winner is going to go, but the other 3, it's anyone's guess. I think Mucho Gusto probably stays in California, and Baffert's going to try to aim for him to run second in the San Felipe and Santa Anita Derbies. But we'll have to see if Mucho Gusto does anything against Improbable and or Game Winner. But at this point, Mucho Gusto, congrats on winning the Robert B. Lewis. Wake me up when you beat someone who actually has talent. Now, the last race I'm going to touch on here is the San Pasqual for older horses. It was a handicap race won by Battle of Midway. Battle of Midway has come back to racing in 2019. He was retired after his dirt mile victory was found to be a failure as stallion. He was bred to 63 mares. He only got 5 pregnant. So there's more money for him to there's more money for him to make on the track. So they brought him back, and we'll see how Battle of Midway turns out. But I think this race had more to say about MiKinzie than it did about Battle of Midway, because we knew Battle of Midway was a average to good. No, I don't even want to say average, like good to very good horse. He won a Breeders' Cup race, so he has to have some talent. And he didn't beat sorry horses in that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He beat decent horses. So Battle of Midway has talent, and I think Battle of Midway is going to make some noise on the older horse field this year. There's not really a strong horse that we can predict. Like last year, at least I predicted that Accelerate would have the season that he had, and then the year before it was Arrogate and then Gunrunner. There's not a horse like that that we know is going to be really good this year. And there's a ton of horses that are just kind of good that we can speculate if they're going to make the jump. I already touched on Gunnevera. I already talked about Bravazzo. But what this race showed for MiKinzie is that MiKinzie is better at distances of a mile and an eighth and less. He was dominant in the 7 furlong Malibu, and I think that the Baffert connections should think about taking MiKinzie back. You can try him in the Santa Anita Handicap, which I think they're going to do. If I am the Baffert team, I do not ship him halfway around the world to Dubai because he is not going to run well at a mile and a quarter. We've seen him run once at distances above a mile and an eighth. He faded badly in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and I don't think the Baffert team is going to take the risk of shipping a horse with MiKinzie, who is suspect at distances higher than a mile and an eighth. So if they want to give him another test at 10 furlongs, mile and a quarter, they'll do it at the big cap. And I think that's a safe bet for him. I don't think he goes overseas to Dubai. If he does, I think it's a big mistake that they're making. But MiKinzie should have his distance taken back. I know Roy H. is a very good sprinter, and I already talked about him, but I think they should point MiKinzie toward running in sprint races and maybe even mile races. If I were them, I would even ship him out to the East Coast and run him in the Met Mile at Belmont on Belmont Stakes Day. I know that's a long way away, but MiKinzie, the longest race that he's won is the Pennsylvania Derby a mile and an eighth. He did not win at a mile and a quarter. He was terrible in the Breeders' Cup Classic. But the other thing with MiKinzie, he has never won back-to-back races, which is another problem. He's not consistent. So I got 2 strikes against MiKinzie. I got strike 1, he can't win at a distance, and strike 2, he's not consistent. I said on Instagram that 2018 or 2019 could be the year of MiKinzie. I think I'm going to walk back that statement because I don't trust MiKinzie at a distance. So if it's going to be the year of MiKinzie, it's going to be the year of MiKinzie at 8 furlongs and less. MiKinzie at 7 to 8 furlongs, I love. But at distances at 9 furlongs, I'm suspect. 10 furlongs, I want no part of MiKinzie. So the older horse division for 2019 is going to be something that we're not going to know who the leader is for a while. The leader could come out of the big cap, or it could come out of the Dubai World Cup, or it could be neither of these races. But last year I could tell you and I could foresee Accelerate making the jump, and I could foresee other horses in the past. This year I have no idea. It could be Gunnevera, it could be Bravazzo, it could be MiKinzie, it could be Battle of Midway. We'll just have to see. Quickly, just want to touch on what's going on this weekend. We got a couple of races for 3-year-olds. One of them, the Sam F. Davis, is worth points toward the Kentucky Derby. And the other one, the San Vicente, is just a race for 3-year-olds. in a preparation for the San Felipe and Santa Anita Derby. It has produced winners before. Most recently, it produced Nyquist. Nyquist won the San Vicente, and that was the last race he ever ran in California. But for the Sam F. Davis, the headliner is Knicks Go, and a lot of people think Knicks Go has some chance of making noise in the Kentucky Derby prep races. I think he probably wins this race, but I'm not very high on Knicks Go. He won the Claiborne Breeders' Futurity, but he was 11th in the Kentucky Jockey Club. He was also second to game winner in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but I just don't know what I'm getting with Knicks Go. I think he wins this race, but I just don't think he's as good as some of the other horses. And then out in California, we got Bob Baffert's fourth 3-year-old, who I think he's got 4 horses that have chances to make it to the Kentucky Derby. I already touched on Improbable. I already touched on Game Winner, and I touched on Mucho Gusto. Coliseum is his 4th, and another horse that is going to, I think, get to the Kentucky Derby. What route he takes I have no idea. I'm not even going to venture a guess, but I'm guessing it will involve some sort of. I think he's going to. I'll give where I think Baffert's horses are going to go. Game Winner and Mucho Gusto, I think, are going to stay in California. Improbable goes to Oakland. I think that's already been confirmed, or if it's not confirmed, it's just the general consensus. And then I think Coliseum might go to Sunland Park and run in the Sunland Derby. But we'll see how Coliseum runs this weekend. He's my pick. My picks this weekend are Knicks Go and Improbable, or not Improbable, Coliseum. And then we also got the Last Virginist for fillies. We'll discuss that next week on episode 2. Thank you for tuning in. Also, I will not be discussing Eclipse Awards on this podcast. I wrote a blog about it. I'll tweet out a link to that, and I'll pin it on Twitter. You can follow the Racing Rundown podcast on Instagram at Racing Rundown and on Twitter at Rundown Racing. Thank you for your time. Have a good week.
Bid has 6 to make up. They're at the top of the stretch. Mucho Gusto, Gunmetal Gray on the far outside. Easy Shot is in striking range. Magnificent McCool at the rail. They're in the final furlong, and Mucho Gusto now pours it on. Opens up 3. Easy Shot, Gunmetal Gray will battle for second. Mucho Gusto, impressive in victory, cruises home by 5 easy lengths.